Hello and welcome back to yet another video on the Alejandro Hernandez podcast. Today's going to be a different kind of video than I've released in the past couple of weeks. Obviously, since the NFL season started, I've only focused on doing top 10 teams in the NFL after each week and then the picks for each week. However, I feel like there's something I got to address. Obviously, my favorite team, the New York Giants, fired Brian Daboll this week. And I think it's a huge news. It's bigger news than the Titans firing their coach because obviously Brian Daboll is a part of the New York Giants. The New York Giants are one of the most prestigious franchises in the NFL, and I feel like it's something I wanted to address because I wanted to offer my opinion on what I think is next for the organization for years to come, what's next for Jackson Dart, and what's next for this team overall. So without further ado, I want to start off with where I believe this all started to go downhill, and honestly, it's for a multitude of reasons, but I believe whether it was the right decision to move on from Daboll, I believe it is. I believe it is, and I believe it's also time to move off Joe Schoen, the general manager. And I think they were a package deal. They were a package deal when they arrived in New York back in 2022. It was both Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen who came from Buffalo. Brian Daboll was the offensive coordinator, and I believe Joe Schoen was one of the chief operating officers in player performance. And he was one. I think he was the assistant GM in Buffalo. I believe that was what his position was, and we brought him over to be our general manager in New York, and Brian Daboll to be our head coach. And 2022, that season was magical. It was magical, man. It was a fever dream for me being a Giants fan. It was only the second time since I've been following the team ever since 2016 that we had made the playoffs. And I really thought that was the year that really kickstarted us as a franchise once again at being one of the best teams in the NFL. I mean, Daniel Jones wasn't great, but I feel like Brian Daboll squeezed every ounce of talent he could out of Daniel Jones at the time. And that playoff game against the Vikings when he had 3 total touchdowns, or I believe it was 2 or 3 total touchdowns, almost 400 total yards rushing and passing. He looked awesome. That Daniel Jones against the Vikings in that playoff game looks like Daniel Jones of this year, and I thought that game against the Vikings was a sign of things to come. And then the next year followed. Besides the Philadelphia divisional round when we got blown out, the next game, the first game of the season the following year, 40-0 at home against Dallas on Sunday Night Football. I think that was when it started to go downhill. That was really the thing that kicked the rock down the hill for the Giants organization. It all started to go downhill from there. Daniel Jones ends up getting a torn ACL that season, and then there was a series of draft picks by Joe Schoen that just did not pan out. In the first round of his first draft, he drafted Kayvon Thibodeau with the 5th overall pick, then Evan Neal right after 2 picks later. Evan Neal is unplayable now. He's simply unplayable, and Kayvon, when you draft a guy 5th overall, especially an edge rusher, your expectation for that player is that he's going to become a top 5 player at his position. And Kayvon has been good. I wouldn't say Kayvon's been a bust, but he has not lived up to the number 5 overall pick in the draft potential that we drafted him to be. And I think that was definitely a whiff by Joe Schoen. But he also has had some good drafts, most notably this past one. And last year's was also good too. Last year, he had Malik Neighbors in the first round, Tyler Nubin in the second round. Nubin's been kind of disappointing. But then later on in the draft, Tyrone Tracy, Theo Johnson. He had a few hits. He definitely had a few hits. And then Joe Schoen was also the guy who brought in Cordell Flott as well in the draft. I believe we drafted Flott in the 6th round. So that was another hit. And then this year's draft, he had potentially 3 offensive rookie of the year candidates and defensive rookie of the year candidates with Jackson Dart, Cam Scatterbo, and Abdul Carter. And so far, that is looking good. So I believe the future is bright. So now we've covered Joe Schoen's part. Well, first, I covered the draft picks. Let's cover the free agent signings. He brought in Paulson Adebo this year, who was supposed to be our number 1 corner. He's missed a couple games, but he's also gotten fried all season by wide receiver ones. He has not lived up to that contract. Then there's been other signings I'm trying to think of. Brian Burns was definitely an A+. He currently leads the league in sacks. He brought him in on a trade. That was a great move. But there's been some other very, very questionable moves, most notably Saquon Barkley. And my take on Saquon Barkley is that I believe it was the right decision to let him go. Saquon Barkley was never going to reach his Hall of Fame potential on the New York Giants. It just wasn't possible. We were wasting his best years because we can never put a competent offensive line around him. And he went to Philadelphia, and Philadelphia was able to maximize his potential because of their brilliant offensive line. And Saquon would have never reached that peak on the Giants. It just simply wasn't possible because of the situation around him. And would I have rather him go to any other organization other than Philadelphia? Obviously, I'm a Giants fan. I do not want to see him in a Philadelphia uniform. But was it the right decision to move on from Saquon? I believe it was. I believe it was. And I think that, with the current state of that roster at the time, it wouldn't have made sense to re-sign Saquon to that big of a contract extension because at the time, Saquon was an injury-prone player. And he hasn't been injured in Philadelphia, but it just didn't make sense at the time. So I agree with Joe Schoen's decision to not bring back Saquon. But then you can't turn around and not want to offer Saquon 3 years, $38 million, 3 years, $39 million, whatever it was, and then proceed to offer Darius Slayton 3 years, $36. And Slayton's obviously been a massive disappointment. And, those type of decisions are the decisions that get you fired. And I think that the main reason why Brian Daboll was fired, not because of the concussion things with Jackson Dart, I don't think that's the main reason. I think the main reason Brian Daboll got fired was because of the success of Saquon Barkley in Philadelphia, the success of Daniel Jones in Indianapolis, the success of Xavier McKinney in Green Bay. And I understand those are executive decisions that were made by Joe Schoen to not bring those guys back, to not retain those guys. But it's also due to the coaching that those players were able to maximize their potential on other teams rather than the Giants. And most notably Daniel Jones. I think Daniel Jones was the deal breaker for John Mara. Looking at how Daniel Jones has had such success in Indianapolis, he turns around and looks at Brian Daboll and says, I thought you couldn't work with this guy. You told me that this guy was not good enough to be a New York Giant and that he was failing us as an organization, and we weren't able to be successful because of Daniel Jones. We scapegoated Daniel Jones because you thought that you couldn't win with him, and now he's in another organization and he's currently 8-2. So who's the real problem here? Was it Daniel Jones or was it you? Considering Daniel Jones was 8-2 now and we're 2-8, John Mara had no choice. How can you tell me now that Daniel Jones was the problem when he's 8-2 with another team and he's leading them to the number 1 seed in the conference? Now I realize that the problem was you all along. So that, I believe, was the reason that Brian Daboll is gone. And now that we've covered why Joe Schoen should be gone, I think he should be gone because there's been a multitude of mistakes that just can't go unanswered. And there needs to be consequences, and I believe that Shane Bowen has to go as well. I believe we should just clean house. I think it's time to clean house. I think it's time to get rid of, we obviously just got rid of Daboll. I believe at the end of the season we will move off Joe Schoen, and then we'll also move off our entire coaching staff with Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator who's now the interim head coach. I believe we'll move off him, and we should definitely move off of Shane Bowen because in the offseason I was talking about this defense being a top 5, top 10 defense, and now they're a bottom 5 defense, which I think is just insane given the amount of talent we have, especially on the defensive line. Abdul Carter still yet to register a full sack in his NFL career, and this season Dexter Lawrence's fall off has been massive. So it's just unfortunate really that our coaching staff has not been able to maximize the talent on the roster, and that's all due to coaching. So for that reason I believe the move was justified to fire Brian Daboll, and at the end of the day you are what your record is. Brian Daboll was 20-40-1 as a head coach for the New York Giants. That is not good enough. That is not the standard we want for a New York football team, for a New York franchise. That is not the standard we hold ourselves to. So I believe that that was the right decision to move off Daboll. Now, for what's in store for our future. I think that this Giants team is very similar to last year's Patriots team. Last year's Patriots team, they drafted Drake May. They had some good talent, young talent on the defense with Christian Gonzalez, and they had a weak offense around Drake May, but really all they needed was a culture-changing head coach. That is all that they needed to quickly turn things around, and they have done just that. They played last season, they ended 4-13 with a top 5 draft pick. The Giants are probably going to finish this year 4-13 with a top 5 draft pick, and with their quarterback of the future locked in. Last year the Patriots knew, and pretty much the entire NFL knew, yeah, Drake May is their guy. Going into this offseason, everyone knows Jackson Dart is our guy. And I believe that is going to be attracting head coaches and attracting general managers who wouldn't want to take over a team with their franchise quarterback on a rookie contract, their best skill position players, Dart and Cam Scatabo, Neighbors and Cam Scatabo on rookie contracts, and with a young defense with Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau. We haven't re-signed Thibodeau yet, but I expect us to do so. And if we don't, then we should trade him for a draft pick. If we do, then that's another draft pick. And if not, then he's under contract. Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, and Abdul Carter are all currently under contract. This is a dream scenario for any head coach and any general manager. We need another Mike Vrabel. We need a guy who is going to change the culture and change the culture from a losing culture to a winning culture. I believe that's what this franchise needs, and I believe we're going to get it this offseason. I expect this Giants team to be this year's Patriots next year because Jackson Dart is going to get back healthy. Cam Scatabo is going to be back healthy. Malik Neighbors is going to be back healthy. I believe we'll add another receiver either in free agency or the draft, and we also have Wan'Dale Robinson and Theo Johnson to complement those top-tier weapons. The offensive line has improved. We've gone from one of the worst-ranked offensive lines to middle of the pack with Andrew Thomas being one of the best left tackles, if not the best left tackle in all of football. And if we get a defensive-minded head coach, which I believe we should, and a good offensive coordinator, that's what New England did. They went out and got a defensive coach in Mike Vrabel and then brought back Josh McDaniels to run the offense. And right now he's maximizing Drake May's potential. So I believe that's what the Giants should do. And I think that top candidates, in my opinion, for head coach, I know this might sound a little off-brand and it might sound not probably the most popular choice, but Antonio Pierce, a former New York Giants player. Mike Vrabel was a former a former New England Patriot player, and now he's returned as their head coach. Antonio Pierce is not the most popular name out there because obviously he didn't have much success as the Las Vegas Raiders coach, but I believe that he is the right culture changer. I believe Antonio Pierce was on those winning Giants organizations with Tom Coughlin as the head coach. I believe that he's the right guy for the job. And if we bring in an offensive coordinator like a Clint Kubiak, and I know Clint Kubiak is probably going to want a head coaching job, but if we bring in a guy that is able to maximize Jackson Dart's potential, and I believe there's going to be a ton of offensive coaches who would want to work with Jackson Dart. So if we can bring in Antonio Pierce either as our head coach or defensive coordinator, and a guy like Clint Kubiak as our head coach or offensive coordinator, I believe we can get this organization turned around like this. And I hope it happens, and I believe it's very possible that it does happen because I believe the Giants' job, like the Patriots' job last year, is going to be the highest head coaching job in demand this offseason because we have the quarterback of the future, we have the young pieces surrounding the quarterback, and everyone's on rookie contracts. Abdul Carter's on a rookie contract, Malik Neighbors, Cam Scatabo, Jackson Dart, Tyrone Tracy, Theo Johnson, Wan'Dale Robinson's even still on his rookie contract. I believe his contract's expiring this year. We have so many young pieces to build around. All we need is the right culture-changing head coach to make that happen, and I believe we will land that this offseason, and I am predicting that this Giants team next year is going to be this year's Patriots, and we are going to take that leap. And I hope it happens, and I believe it will. And with all that being said, that is going to be it for this video. These are my thoughts on the Giants firing Brian Daboll, and I will see you guys next time from when I release my top 10 teams in the NFL.